Beirut, Islamic State militants lost their last foothold in a major city and a strategic border crossing on Friday, as the Syrian and Iraqi militaries made significant advances, squeezing the militant group into a shrinking patch of territory near the border. Syrian government forces, supported by intense Russian airstrikes and Iranian-backed militias on the ground, drove the militants from the last few neighborhoods they controlled in the eastern provincial capital of Deir al-Zour, the Syrian army said. Across the border, the Iraqi army and allied Iranian-backed militias seized control of a crucial border crossing after taking most of the town of Qa'im, Iraq, from the Islamic State, according to the Iraqi military chief of staff. The military advances dealt a severe blow to the militant group, leaving it with fragments of its self-declared caliphate that once stretched from the center of Syria to the outskirts of Baghdad. They also provided yet another indication that President Bashar al-Assad's fortunes have rebounded and that, with help from Russian and Iranian allies, the Syrian army can take back territory. The Islamic State now maintains just a few pockets of western Anbar province in Iraq and somewhat larger patches in Syria, where it controls about a third of the desert province of Deir al-Zour, including a string of small towns and villages, and an oil field. The developments also set the stage for a battle for the Syrian border town of Bukamal, on the strategic highway from Baghdad to Damascus, and what appears to be the endgame for the remaining Islamic State territory in Iraq and Syria. The seizing of Deir al-Zour punctuates the turnaround Mr. Assad has managed in more than 6 years of war. Just 2 years ago, the idea that the government would manage to take back the city seemed remote. When the Syrian war broke out in 2011, soldiers were defecting from the Syrian army and only a fraction of the troops could be counted on for loyalty in the field. But Mr. Assad hit hard at trouble-held neighborhoods, pummeling Syrian cities with airstrikes with the support of Iran and its Lebanese ally, Hezbollah. In 2015, Russia entered the war on Mr. Assad's behalf, carrying out airstrikes against the Islamic State and other insurgent factions. Russia's backing allowed Mr. Assad's forces to focus on one front at a time. Once the non-Islamic State insurgents were contained, the pro-government alliance turned its attention to the Islamic State, which it has now mostly routed. Still, Mr. Assad is faced with running a country that is still divided, politically and territorially, where major cities are devastated, the security forces deeply dependent on Russia and Iran, and the economy gutted. The government's announcement of victory in Deir al-Zour came just weeks after an American-backed, Kurdish-led militia, called the Syrian Democratic Forces, took over the city of Raqqa, which had served as the de facto capital of the Islamic State. The militants never controlled the whole of the city of Deir al-Zour, although they held most of the surrounding province, an oil-rich region that provided an important source of revenue. For 2.5 years, though, the Islamic State had surrounded and besieged 200,000 civilians in the government-held section of the city. Its population dwindled to 90,000, the United Nations estimates, as people escaped or were smuggled out. Now, the group's most important territory is the border town of Bukamal and the border crossing on the Syrian side. Iraqi forces claimed the other side of the border on Friday, along with most of Qa'im, Bukamal's counterpart on the Iraqi side. That battle for the remaining Islamic State territory could inflame tensions among the competing forces fighting the militants as they converge on the region. The Russian and Iranian-backed alliance that supports the Syrian government, the rival American-backed group, Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, and the Iraqi forces that are pursuing Islamic State holdouts on their side of the border. The stakes are high, with the competing armies seeking not only to vanquish the Islamic State, but also racing against each other to win influence in the strategic border zone. Russia, which wants the Syrian government to reclaim all of its territory, and the United States, which wants to counter Iranian influence, have accused each other of firing at their respective allies on the ground. The SDF, a Kurdish and Arab alliance, wants to seize as much territory as possible, including oil fields. Those resources and points of leverage could increase its chances of staving off a government takeover of the areas it holds, including Raqqa and the areas to the northeast where Kurds have carved out a measure of autonomy. Iran wants the friendly Syrian government to control the area. With Iraq already a strong ally, Iran could establish a land route linking it with Lebanon, the base of its most powerful allied militia in the region.